Welcome to Haunted Talks, the official podcast of the Haunted Walk, offering ghost tours and paranormal adventures in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, Ontario. My name is Jim Dean. I am the creative director, and we really appreciate you joining us for today's episode. When the ship Mary Celeste was found off the Azores in 1872, it was immediately clear that something was wrong. The ship was deserted. What happened? Did the crew stage a mutiny? Were they attacked by pirates? Caught in a storm? Or some other freak weather event? Stories of this ghost ship quickly began to spread around the world, as did the fanciful stories of her fate. Join us as we set sail to explore one of the greatest nautical unsolved mysteries of all time. But before we get to that, a very happy Thanksgiving to all of our Canadian listeners. It is the long weekend, and the weather looks fantastic in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, and I would like to invite you to join us for a night of spooky storytelling. There truly is no better time of year to join us. If you are a little further afield and can't join us in person, don't worry, we have your Halloween fun covered. Every Saturday night, we are offering our virtual haunted campfires, featuring some of the best ghost storytellers in the world. This Saturday, October 9th, we're joining up with our friends from Lantern Ghost Tours to learn all about one of London, England's most haunted neighborhoods, Farrington. Some real dark history associated with that spot, and I can't wait. The week after, October 16th, we're heading to the granddaddy of them all, Salem, Massachusetts. You are not going to want to miss those campfires. If you enjoy this podcast, you will absolutely enjoy our campfire experience. If you want to try something a little more spooky, we also have our Haunting at Home, a guided online audio experience which challenges you to complete a series of experiments with the paranormal. What will happen at your house? For information about our in-person ghost tours in Kingston, Ottawa, or Toronto, as well as our virtual haunted campfires and our Haunting at Home, please visit our website, which is hauntedwalk.com. To keep up with the latest from us, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, all four at Haunted Walk. And if you're enjoying these episodes, please be sure to subscribe to the show so you know when the new episodes do come out, and we always appreciate receiving 5-star reviews. Out of the perfectly clear blue horizon, slowly looms a dark figure. Her masts, thin and high, her sails torn apart, her loose rigging eerily dangling. It is the ship Mary Celeste, and she is totally devoid of life. From the Dea Grata, Captain David Morehouse immediately felt something was amiss. Mary Celeste was rigged all wrong and headed in the wrong direction. Was she in need? He ordered his vessel to approach her and fly signals, but there was no response. Captain Moorhead dispatched his first mate and another crewman in a small boat to go investigate. Morehouse had his suspicions about the lonely vessel, but he left them aside while he awaited his first mate's report. Drawing close to the vessel, the first mate was finally able to decipher her name. Mary Celeste. We have to imagine this revelation would have taken his breath away, as he would have remembered the ship from only a few weeks before. Dea Grata had left only 8 days after Mary Celeste. The first mate understood his vessel to be the slower of the pair. A feeling of dread must have come over him as he clambered over the side of the ship and onto its empty deck. The ship began its fateful voyage on November 7th, 1872, sailing with 7 crewmen and Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, his wife, Sarah, and the couple's 2-year-old daughter, Sophia. The 282-ton brigantine battled heavy weather for 2 weeks to reach the Azores, where the ship's log last entry was recorded at 5 a.m. on November 25th. The scene that greeted the first mate must have been completely alien. Mary Celeste was empty, but sailing under her own power, a ghost ship. He found the ship's launch had disappeared. That little boat would have been the crew's only other vessel, their only possible salvation from the endless depths. The first mate found some of the hatches to the cargo space open, others firmly latched. Carefully, he descended into the grim darkness of the dead ship's hull, uncertain of what he would find. Her timbers creaking, beaten by the ceaseless ocean. He found not a soul aboard. Her cargo, over 1,700 casks of denatured alcohol, sat bleakly in the dim underbelly, which had about a meter's depth of water in it. The first mate knew it wouldn't be enough to sink the ship, and she didn't seem to be taking on any more water. He then found a makeshift sounding rod. Someone had tried to measure the depth of the water in a hurry, it seemed. The ship was well stocked. The crew would have had enough food to last for quite some time. The only place seriously amiss was the captain's cabin, with papers strewn about and a sword still sheathed under the bed. Most of the ship's official paperwork was missing, and the captain's navigation tools were gone. The first mate found no sign of fire or major conflict. If the crew had left, they must have taken the ship's boat and maybe had been swamped at sea, while the Mary Celeste sailed on. The first mate then returned to the Dea Grata. Captain Morehouse knew he had recognized the ship. After all, he knew of Mary Celeste's skipper, Mr. Benjamin Briggs. Seeing as Nova Scotia was barely 300,000 people strong in 1860, it isn't a stretch to imagine that the sailors there were a close-knit bunch. To Morehouse, the situation was clear. He had to deliver the ship in its entirety to Gibraltar, where the Royal Navy salvage courts could determine the cause of the disappearance and award him a handsome sum for the recovery of the derelict. The simple fact that a small group from Dea Grata were able to sail the ghost ship hundreds of miles to Gibraltar without major incident proves the ship was still seaworthy. It could also, of course, be evidence that Dea Grata and her captain had been involved in the disappearance of Briggs and his crew. From the moment the Dea Grata landed in anchor in Gibraltar, there was scandal. Captain Morehouse was immediately under suspicion for murder. The paranoid Attorney General of Gibraltar, Frederick Solly Flood, imagined Morehouse had conspired with the crew of Mary Celeste and done away with them once he had both ships. In order to confirm his theory, a group of Royal Navy captains were brought in to act as experts. They soon discovered axe marks along the bow of the ship and posited it could be possible that someone had intentionally made the marks to seem as if Mary Celeste had collided with another vessel. They also found stains along some of the ship's railings and spots on the captain's sword. The Attorney General couldn't be swayed from imagining a blood-stained sword and bloody railings. To him, foul play was the only explanation. The Navy captains pointed out that the sword was sheathed when discovered, and spots on it were rust, not blood. Flood could have easily retorted that Diagratia simply falsified their logs of the discovery to cover their own homicidal tracks. The tale of brutal murder would never leave Morehouse, even though he was eventually compensated 1,700 British pounds for the salvage. Today, that is about 350,000 Canadian dollars, much less than the normal salvaging bounty. Upon awarding Morehouse the bounty, the deciding judge said Morehouse and his crew would be under suspicion in the court of public opinion forever. He was indeed correct. To this day, the jury is still out on the disappearance of Mary Celeste's crew. A mystery of 150 years that still captures imagination and inspires modern inquiry. Present-day historians are still combing through the records of insurance adjusters and many newspaper articles that covered the intrigue. In fact, the story was so sensational it exploded onto the pages of newspapers around the world. There, in the newspaper print, it gained its mythical status, with various authors suggesting that the crew were murdered by a giant squid or some other supernatural force. Other authors suggested that the crew may have mutinied and murdered the captain and his family, drunk on the alcohol stored in the ship's cargo. The fact that denatured alcohol is effectively poison did nothing to dissuade these excited authors of the 1870s, who wrote narratives from the perspective of the crew or discovered lost messages concerning the last moments of Mary Celeste. As stories of the ghost ship spread, the value of the actual ship plummeted, and its insurance rates skyrocketed. No one in their right mind wanted anything to do with a vessel plagued by possible sea monsters, murdering vapors, and mystical disappearances. In fact, this happened to be the second time Mary Celeste had been discovered empty. The first time, a crew in 1867 abandoned her in a storm, and she was found derelict and returned to service a few months later. Though no record of her mercantile exploits exists between 1867 and 1871, when she came under the doomed brig's command. This, of course, leads a wandering mind to wonder if the ship herself may have been cursed, preferring to have her decks empty and quiet. The ship would never make another profit. Her sailing in the warm waters of the West Indies did no particular good. Eventually, she came to the command of Captain Parker, a scheming gentleman who planned to finally put the cursed ship to use. His plan, a common one in those days, was simply insurance fraud. He had Mary Celeste overinsured and then intended to sink her against the reefs off Haiti. While gorgeous modern films give us a very colorful image of the reefs, for wooden-hulled ships, they were certain doom. A reef could cut through the thick timber of a tall ship like a knife through skin, and there was no surer way to kill a ship. Captain Parker deftly brought the Mary Celeste to her killing ground on January 3rd, 1885, where he ran her straight onto the reef. Tearing away the bottom of the hull and immediately starting to flood her. Parker then had the great mast torn down with his axe, His excuse, during trial, was this might slow the sinking of the ship as it would reduce the wind forcing it onto the reef. Ultimately, his dismembering Mary Celeste simply to make an insurance claim seemed more plausible. His excuse for hitting the reefs all boiled down to blaming his helmsman for turning the ship in the wrong direction. The court in New York was not swayed and charged him with barratry, which is the intentional destruction of your own ship. For such a heinous offense, the punishment was death. Eventually found guilty and ultimately fined in lieu of hanging, a destitute Captain Parker died only a few months later, penniless. The first, the third, the last, and most important skipper were all lost while engaging with Mary Celeste. Surely a harsh mistress to take 4 for masters to the great beyond. It isn't difficult to imagine how the vessel and its cursed career made front-page news for decades, as various authors all sought to imagine new twists to the tale. Even Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, of Sherlock Holmes fame, threw his hat in the myth-making ring with a short story in 1884. The tale, which forever cemented Mary Celeste as a mythical ghost ship, also completely muddied the waters of history. Doyle renamed the ship to Marie Celeste, and from then, many accounts use the names interchangeably, making it difficult to separate fact from fiction. Mary Celeste has been the topic of radio plays, film, and even television shows. Each time the old timbered ghost ship sailed onto the silver screen or through the radio waves, her myth grew even greater. Bela Lugosi, better known as Count Dracula in the original 1931 film, featured in a 1935 adaptation of the Mary Celeste story. The ship had secured its place in public consciousness and is yet to be dislodged from the minds of mariners and those interested in the paranormal and the unexplained. For a century, the ship remained a focal point of supernatural storytelling, until historians and scientists slowly began to piece the story back together. Institutions such as the Smithsonian, University College London, and prominent individuals such as Clive Cussler have all attempted to solve the mystery using contemporary technology, science, and research methods. Even with the most modern underwater scanning technology and modern laboratory methods, it seems the mystery will endure. An attempt to locate the wreck in 2001 failed when the remains thought to be Mary Celeste's turned out to be younger than the ship herself. Laboratory experiments done by University College London in 2006 pointed to a gas explosion from the denatured alcohol as a likely explanation, since the explosion left no marks, but may have caused fears of the entire cargo exploding. Still, this doesn't explain why the crew didn't simply board the vessel when no secondary explosions materialized. Other modern explanations blame waterspouts, which can cause major barometric changes and sudden intense downpours, which would explain the water in the hold. Such an event could have led Captain Briggs to believe his ship had taken on more water than she had. Alternatively, an undersea earthquake may have caused a sudden wave to result in the same effect, though that wouldn't explain the desertion of the ship. There is, of course, also the classic explanation, an iceberg. That would explain the axe-like marks on the front of the vessel, but no other vessels reported icebergs in the area, and again, desertion should have only been temporary. Another theory notes that on its previous voyage, the Mary Celeste had carried coal, and that the ship had recently been extensively refitted. Coal dust and construction debris could have fouled the ship's pumps, which would explain the one disassembled pump that was found on the Mary Celeste. With the pump inoperative, Captain Briggs would not have known how much seawater was in his ship's hull, which was too fully packed for him to measure visually. At that point, Briggs, having just come through rough weather, having finally and belatedly sighted land, and having no way of determining whether his ship would sink, may have well issued an order to abandon Mary Celeste. And then, some other disaster must have hit the survivors. No matter what explanation is given, there is always a major piece of the puzzle absent. If there was foul play, why was there so little evidence of struggle? And if Diagratia was involved, how did she catch up with Mary Celeste? If it had been a waterspout, and the barometer had been affected, why did the makeshift rod to measure water in the hull fail to show that she wasn't taking on more water? Why abandon the ship so far from land? If it had been an alcohol explosion, which left no mark, why not attempt to secure the hold instead of abandoning the ship, which still wouldn't explain the water in the hold? No matter how the story is told, there is always a tantalizing thread taunting the 21st century experts, and there may always be. If the wreck is ever discovered, its condition almost certainly will not yield any new insights to the people, the present, or the future. Her timbers are most certainly rotting away to leave the ship finally, and truly, a ghost. Before she was ever Mary Celeste, her name was Amazon. She launched as Amazon in 1861, a name referring to the fierce, semi-mythological women warriors of antiquity. What has never been in contention concerning the Amazons is their ferocity. In most artistic depictions from the classical era, they are depicted at war as excellent cavalry, archers, and individual masters at arms. The ancient historian Herodotus tells a story of a Greek raid against the Amazons, which captured many Amazonian prisoners. However, on the journey back to Greece, the Amazonian captives successfully overwhelmed and murdered the Greeks. Even with no nautical knowledge, the Amazonians sailed their captured vessel back to their homeland. It is a strange coincidence that a vessel carrying the name of such fierce and independent warriors outlived 4 of its captains and disappeared an entire crew, sailing on her own some 400 miles to become the world's first verifiable ghost ship. If you're ever at sea and feel particularly safe on whatever vessel you're on, remember that sometimes entire ships disappear without a trace. Whole crews seem to vanish, and sometimes a ship is perfectly capable of sailing herself. Thank you so much for joining us for the episode. If you have a theory about the Mary Celeste, I would love to hear it. And you can share those with us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, all 4 at Haunted Walk. For information on our in-person ghost tours, our virtual haunted campfires taking place every Saturday night in October, or our Haunting at Home online audio experience, please visit our website, which is hauntedwalk.com. As always, a special thanks to our Haunted Talks team, including Michelle Dennis, our intrepid audio editor, Ezra Bedeau, our chief nautical researcher, and Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.filmmusic.io for the additional music. Full credits can be found on our website. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the show so you know when the new episodes come out. And if you have a moment, we would certainly appreciate a 5-star review wherever you listen to us. Until we meet again, sweet dreams.